I think we're live. It
Oh, said live.
says live.
Hello.
Oh, Nick says we out here.
Ooh. Oh.
Hello, everybody. How's it going? Oh no, that's not good. Okay.
Huh? I'm in trouble
No,
already.
no. I had it. I had the stream playing in another tab, I think, and so it just started. But anyway,
Oh.
we're all good. We're all good. Okay. Welcome everybody on this October 16th, on the anniversary of the raid on Harpers Ferry. I want to say we're still a few hours out. I think it was pretty late at night when it started. So
Yeah, close to midnight, I believe.
Mhm.
Not that
What
we
went on
intend to go
for
that long.
like 3 days.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. I think you were going to start out with something, but
Yeah. So I guess I sort of like the big question is I was going to ask you is like, so we'll ask I think it's the Haggadah question. Why is this night different from all other nights, Noah? What happened today that marks us out as a unique piece of American history?
I tell the Hanukkah story. Well,
It is an attempted exodus, I guess.
yeah. I mean, this is something I was going to say to you earlier too. Is like Potawatomi is almost like a Passover event too, but that might be an interesting angle as well. But
As when we get to the symbolism happens section.
yes.
So stick around, guys.
Yeah. Let's just pull up a picture while we're here of this. So we have our little engine room. So John Brown prepared for a long time, over the course of probably a year or more. He was hiring people to kind of train him in military tactics and gathered a whole group of people together. And his goal was the emancipation of slaves and to build an army to basically wipe out slavery in the South. And so he chose Harpers Ferry as this kind of first point of doing that. So he hid with his kind of large group of about 19 people or so. And they all kind of gathered together in this home, hid for a while until the night struck, and they decided to carry out this attack. There is an armory in Harpers Ferry that they went after, and when they approached, I mean, there's a lot of other events that are happening throughout the night, including the first person to die is kind of a person who was kind of wrong place, wrong time. A freed black man who was kind of looking out to see what was going on, and he ends up getting shot. And so they take over the armory with no casualties from the people who are running the armory. I think there might have been one person, and they're able to take it over, but it takes a little too long, and support isn't coming. They thought they were going to have more people show up, and they have their hostages in the engine room and another location, but then they end up just kind of all kind of getting into this engine room, and then it's a stand down for a couple days as they are kind of surrounded and are whittled down until the Marines come in and take over. Is that a good summary? Did I miss any kind of?
Yeah, let's. No, I mean let's pull back just a little bit. So we're talking about John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, and so this is one of the most important moments leading up to the Civil War. Some might say sort of like the final, like the final outburst that kind of like made violent conflict between the North and the South inevitable. So we're at 1859. So about a year or two before actual formal hostilities begin at the firing of Fort Sumter. And this is a period where tensions between the North and South have been rising for like
a while,
a solid like 2 decades.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we'll get to it a little bit. Like, Brown's story really starts in 1830 or so. But
I was going to say there's a quote from Frederick Douglass, which I think is helpful, which is in talking about John Brown, saying that if John Brown didn't end the war to end slavery, he started the war that ended slavery.
Yeah.
And this is the event that kind of was considered the event that started the Civil War. Some people would say that this is actually the first battle of the Civil War, depending on how you look at it. But
that's for those that don't know about Kansas, but we're not talking about Kansas tonight. But
I'm still listening. I'm gonna shut my door and then I'll.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and this was, I guess it's probably worth mentioning at this point, because I think you and I, well, you first got fascinated by John Brown and drove me into your obsession, and we have been codependent with each other in this topic for the last month.
Yeah.
So we'll ask the question, like, how did this get your attention? How did John Brown get your attention to the point where you actually like you, a Zoomer, read a book, man? That's a big deal.
Yeah. An old book. So I think I already saw before kind of the current events that's happened. I saw this kind of rising tension going on. The kind of the flexibility people had with political violence specifically, that there was a certain kind of call for political violence. There was a certain kind of pull to that. And you saw it in several different places, and it was kind of steadily growing. And I think I had seen his name, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting connection to make with kind of political violence. John Brown being this kind of mythical figure of political violence, and not widely condemned for the most part by consensus history. He's not really praised, but he's not really condemned. He's kind of not talked about because it's uncomfortable. And then after the Charlie Kirk assassination, I saw more and more people kind of pointing to John Brown as a justification, or a kind of a figure to look to justify the events that happened. And so that got me super interested, but then also kind of bummed out because I had already started my research, and then it kind of became real all of a sudden. And so kind of
and it's also, I would say, very much like mostly kind of like an imagistic sort of like iconic like meme format. Like his image kept kind of popping up. He kept, there was no kind of like careful connection between the events of Harpers Ferry and what's going on here. It's just, this is a figure who did something that caused something good. And so there's these very kind of like loose connections.
Yeah. But you saw people with like his face on their t-shirt as they're saying, Charlie Kirk deserved to die or something like that. And you saw people writing on in chalk, what would John Brown do on college campuses? And there's this kind of, again, like symbolism happens, like there's a connection there to Jesus. Like what is the relationship between the mimetic kind of quality of these figures?
And no, I laugh when you said, what would John Brown do? Because, oh Lordy, once you start getting to know John Brown, nobody knows the answer to that question. Half the time he didn't know the answer to that question.
So yeah, what caught your attention, I guess?
Firstly, like I think you pointed out in one of the group chats we're in, and then I was listening to some other like podcast, and that kind of popped up. And so I forwarded that to you, and I guess you took that as interest or curiosity, and then away we went. And then you started sending me a couple of things, and then I was just sort of like kind of kept my eyes and my ears open, started to notice it a little bit, and then the first couple walls of text that you sent me, where I'm just like, oh, this is like, first off, just like a wildly interesting, because John Brown was kind of like a black hole in my kind of like education, which is kind of a shame because I grew up in the Virginia area. Harpers Ferry is not like I'm planning to go there when I go back in December to go see it because of how fascinating I am by this story now. And it's 2 hours from my parents live right now. But had never done the trek up there to see what Harpers Ferry was all about. Was quite aware of how significant that was, aside from just, like the paragraph or two in your history textbooks that like, this was the thing that raised tensions enough to move us to a inevitable conflict. It's something that forced the hand, which it really was true. I mean, like one of the things you just mentioned that Harpers Ferry is not just a armory, It is the U.S. government's stockpile of weapons at the time. We're at the time where, I mean, between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, things like standing armies weren't a thing. They were probably less than 20,000 uniformed troops prior to the Civil War at this point in time. So this is just the U.S. government's main stockpile just outside of D.C. For in case a conflict happened, they would have the tools when they mustered up an army or when all those little militias that were everywhere started to form together to repel some other massive invader. But it was purely theoretical, I guess.
Yeah. And there's something to be said about the fact that, it wasn't the whole group, so it was probably around like 10 people. Like 10 people at most were able to take the armory. Like it was, for all intents and purposes, not super well defended, right?
I mean, nobody was more shocked than the guards that night when they showed up.
Yeah.
And one of the things I read is like part of the reason that the response to John Brown took so long is because initially they're like, I don't want to send a telegram to the president and let him know that he doesn't have an armory anymore. It's the embarrassment that we allowed this thing to happen. I mean, like we've all been there in a much lower level problem where like, can I make this problem go away? Can I wait for this to blow over before the boss finds out? Situations like that. It's just really kind of a little bit humorous and very funny to think about that with regards to the United States government's stockpile of weapons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we're talking too, I think there's all this. Yeah, there's so many layers again, even to this specific event of the people who were involved, the initial response from the local townspeople to try to resolve the situation, the different waves of people who come in. I mean, I didn't even mention that like Robert E. Lee is the person who led the attack to kind of shut this all down.
Yeah, no, it's like that's one of the things that just really becomes incredible. I guess part of it is just bound to happen because of how actually small the country was at that point in time. But so many key players were working together when they would, in 2 short years, be firing bullets at one another. Stonewall Jackson was one of John Brown's prison guards once they captured him. Jeb Stuart is another major Confederate general who was also working with Lee to take back Harpers Ferry. It's just wild how many key players were there. Once you get to, so spoiler alert, John Brown is eventually captured, put on trial, and he is hanged for treason, and justifiably so. It's a treasonous act. And amongst other things,
have a problem with it either to a certain amount. I think he was like, yeah, no, that's about right.
Yeah, and I mean, John Wilkes Booth was there at his hanging, amongst other people. It's just crazy. I think he also snuck in too. Like he enlisted in some militia in order to get a uniform so that he could be there to watch. That might have been him, or that might have been a journalist. I think I'm not sure on that one off the top of my head, but it's the more we started kind of like looking into Brown, the more we just see how much like intense kind of like American themes, American like spirits, to use kind of like a corner word, are kind of compressed into this one man's life. It's just the more we kind of like poked just so much substance, so much like meaning, just kind of keeps kind of like pouring out everywhere you look at the story. And so the big question, I guess, is like, what did John Brown think he was doing, leading an assault on the nation's armory with 20 guys? Like he already had more weapons than his guys could use. Like why? Like what was he expecting to happen?
Well, his goal was to take as many guns as he could into the mountains and have a defensible position where he can kind of build up this ex-slave army and have a place to strike from. But they couldn't carry all the guns, and so the goal was to also destroy all the guns that they couldn't carry. So it was basically just wipe out the military capability of the government, basically, and to build off from there. Yeah. I mean, that's the practical answer, at least.
Practical answer. What brought him to this point? I mean, that's there were a lot of people that were involved in the planning of this whole ordeal, and the fact that he only could get 20 people to go along with it, like what brought him to the point where he was both willing to take up arms and did take up arms? Like, what kind of guy would do such a thing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where did he come from?
And he seems to almost like for a lot of people pop out of nowhere, right? He, they see some of his success in Kansas, and he was kind of infamous for that. But then this kind of event in Harpers Ferry, I think everybody like was surprised about how it turned out. Even the people who were involved in planning it, they were like, "Oh, I didn't know it was going to be that, of all things."
Let me figure out where am I? Oh, there it is. Okay. So I guess the big question is, because you have a guy who commits treason. Like, he seizes a U.S., like, insofar as there is such a thing, a U.S. military base. And to put this into the lens of really getting to kind of like part two of my outline here, like how do you think we as Americans should consider this day? Like, if we think it through the lens of like kind of like civil religion, American mythology, what's like how is this a day that should be celebrated as a sort of like holy American day that should be commemorated with like feasts or parties? Is it a day that should live in infamy? Like, how do we? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really weird that the thing that kicked off the Civil War is kind of like massively under discussed.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's an element of almost embarrassment about it, or something like that, of a deep, uncomfortable like feeling. And I think it's kind of built into the Civil War itself, where depending on how you feel about the Civil War or about the results of the Civil War, it's going to change how you see this event.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This was almost a microcosm of it. Yeah. Like, how would I put it? It's something like, if you see the Civil War as, a conquest for good, and
Mm-hmm.
there was nothing, and you see it like John Brown saw it to a certain extent, you're going to see this as a glorious day that,
Mm-hmm.
that even though he failed, he still won. If you see the Civil War as a great tragedy of brothers killing brothers, and maybe there was some good that came out of it with the ending of slavery, but it came at the cost of a lot of like lives and blood. It's going to be a much
Mm-hmm.
more mixed feeling about this day, right? It's going to be, no matter how you feel about one thing, that's always going to play on the background.
Right. I mean, one of the things to note is that Brown is decidedly a guy who comes from the North. He grew up, like, he was born in New England, and kind of like gradually kind of kept bouncing back and forth between New England and like Ohio, New York, spent some time in Kansas, back to kind of like the Boston area. But he's decidedly a man who is of the North, and he is from pretty firm like abolitionist stock. And one of the things that's worth kind of like noting is that for the most part, abolitionism in the North pre-Civil War is usually goes hand in hand with sort of like a Quaker pacifism,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of the, I know, like the great kind of like ironies, contradictions. You have a guy who, at least for parts of his life, he was both of those things. Initially, he was an abolitionist. I've read in some cases he was one of his early experiences, because Brown was born in 1800, and so he was 12 years old when the War of 1812 happened,
Mm-hmm.
and seemed to be pretty disgusted by his experiences of it. That was the sort of thing that kind of confirmed those like pacifist roots. He was just really bothered by, I guess, like the activities of the soldiers, and just really confirmed to the point where he had a civic duty to participate in his local militia, and he would refuse to and pay the fines for that.
And I might be wrong, but it's also the Mexican American War that was going on that he refused to serve in as well. That might be something that I just imagined or something like that, but that might be part of it too.
That one I don't know. No, my reading didn't kind of get to that kind of area.
But yeah, there was like that pacifist strain almost of like, oh, I'm not going to serve this in the military, and you could line that up with the Quaker kind of roots, the objection, but it's very odd to see that kind of character then become this kind of violent figure that you see later. But like, how did he go from one end to the other?
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that it's sort of like it's this kind of like signal jamming event. It's not a kind of like coherent action because on the one hand it's abolitionist, but it's a violent action. It's a violent or an attempted violent uprising where people died because of Brown's actions. And so you can't quite read it as like a uniform action of the abolitionists. And yet at the same time, pretty much all of them, from what I understand, like after seeing what John Brown did, kind of like hemmed and hawed or like, we don't agree with his methods, but we're kind of glad that he did it, I guess.
It depends too, right? There's some people who are like all on board. You have one of his supporters who basically after it happened, he was like, I'm still on board with this. The Transcendentalists I don't think they ever really backed down from any of it. They were like, nope, John Brown's our guy. Stand by him the whole way. But then there are a lot of other people who were like, oh, that's really uncomfortable. I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, it's just it's the sort of thing like it's fed by so many kind of like different like streams, comes from so many different like sources that on the one hand, like because there are so many kind of contradictory things that aren't kind of wedded to a coherent position or ideology that really anybody other than Brown held. But part of that means that everyone can kind of like seize onto it as a symbolic action that they can use for their own purposes. Yeah. If you're pacifist, you can still say like, yeah, but he was for a good cause. For the people, for the Boogaloo Boys, they're ready to go. They're like, yeah, this is it. Let's take up our muskets and run into the fray.
Yeah, I mean, and the interesting thing is that there's a lot of stuff that's put onto Brown that don't reflect him at all, right? There's the transcendental anarchism that's kind of built in there. But John Brown and his behavior is strangely not anarchic for being a violent dissident. Like there's certain things where he would refuse to not fight under the American flag. Like he did not want a different flag that he was advocating for. That there was a certain belief that he had that this ultimately would be a reform of the U.S. government, not a supplanting of it. Yet at the same time, he's attacking a U.S. military installation. Like it's just this contradiction that's all built in there. That, unless you know these things about John Brown, you're going to make these assumptions that it's going to be coherent. And of course, somebody who's attacking a U.S. military installation must be an anarchist or advocating for a different government or something.
Right. Yeah. It's so he doesn't even fit with the abolitionists here because, well, I guess he's more kind of the team of a guy like Frederick Douglass because I think amongst the abolitionists there's this big question: what do you do with the Constitution? Because the Constitution in part is, they never say the words, but it is a document that it's a unity document to bind a free North and an enslaving South together. That's like part of the reason it exists, in order to find a way for those two to remain in one body despite this massive difference. And so you guys, I think it was William Lloyd Garrison, who we'll pull up again in a little bit here, who was a major abolitionist who on the 4th of July at some point during this period would be set fire to the Constitution and gave his own sort of like prophetic biblical condemnation of the U.S. government for having any truck with slavers. I think he called it like a compact with Satan or something.
Get Garrison up there. Yeah. So and he represents one kind of major point, but then you have the Douglas kind of Brown angle of the Declaration of Independence is a more essential document. And then trying to tie it in there.
Yeah, like a fundamental interpretive lens. If you know, You want to talk sort of like the rule of faith for the American canon of the Constitution. Like if you read it with the Declaration in hand, for all the complaints about like the Constitution is a godless document that does not mention anything other than has no mention of like supernatural transcendent authority. Like, well, the Declaration does. It's got self-evident truths that are given to us by our Creator and stuff like that. The purpose is liberty. And I think Douglas's term for he would talk about the Constitution as like a glorious document of liberty. And that's reading it through this lens. Like, no, this is a thing that's liberating for my people if we appropriate it in the proper way.
Yeah. Well, and that's one way that Brown was way ahead of his time, because in many ways he was the abolitionist movement was not necessarily for equal rights or kind of equal status of free blacks. It was often they would say, something like there should be some inequality or, some kind of thing like that. And both Douglas and Brown were very much on the side of like, no, like there needs to be, civil equality. And in many ways that was extremely radical. And it's interesting because Brown almost has in that respect a very like Martin Luther King-esque like racial ethic, but very anti-pacifism as well. So which is another kind of angle to it.
Mm-hmm.
Makes things complex.
Yes. No, one of those, again, like not to get into Kansas too much because it's his own thing, but like one of the early struggles or one of the things that brought Brown to a certain kind of fame was he was involved in the border struggles in Kansas, as Kansas was trying to decide it was going to be a state of the North or a state of the South. And the thing is, most of the folks that were advocating for a free Northern Kansas, their primary rationale was because they don't want black people in Kansas. They're like, we don't want you bringing those people over here, and so we would like to be free, so that we can be like kind of like racially singular, racially homogenous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So here's my other signal jamming question here. So like the raid on Harpers Ferry, should we consider this an early example of something like what happened on January 6th?
I saw your question. I was interested by this. I'm curious to hear what your angle is, because I'm curious to hear what your thoughts to kind of bring that into your mind were.
Well, first off, January 6th wasn't, in one sense, no, because John Brown was armed, and from what I understand, pretty much everyone on January 6th was not armed. So there's that, at least, that goes in their favor of something different. But it is not even like a mass demonstration, but it is a demonstration that is transgressing rules because of their particular opinions about the actions of the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. And it is, and many folks say this is something that goes beyond the pale. Words like traitor have been thrown around for disputing the election. And like part of the reason that came to mind, I think, is it's just another sort of like incoherent event because it's animated by so many different kind of factions that are there for all sorts of different reasons. And I don't know, like I feel like there's just a big difference between folks in the vein of John Brown, like, because one of the things that all of the transcendentalists, all the kind of like the Boston intellectual elites would take note of is that they saw Brown as he's a man of action, he's a man of deeds. That's much more important than like his written works or anything like that. He's somebody who does stuff.
Yeah, the comparison I made in my mind is we talked about like the Jesus and John Wayne, that there's this idea of like the John Wayne archetype, the guy who kind of doesn't play by the rules, and he comes into the town and takes out the bad guy. Yeah. But I'd say it would go even further. It's John Brown is closer to like a Clint Eastwood. Like he's willing to shoot people in the back. Like it, like if it's for the right cause, he'll do it, and he's willing to do that work. And it's interesting, kind of his route of justification, I think, for that as well. Yeah. Because he's very much a Christian. Like I think that's part of it that you can't really avoid, is that everything is kind of based in some sort of level of scripture or his understanding of, Calvinism or something like that.
Yeah. I guess we'll shift there a little bit and talk a little bit of like what did Brown think he was doing? Because part of the thing about like how we judge what Harper's Ferry is in part like what did he think he was doing? Like
Mhm.
asking themselves like, do we want to be on a team with this guy? Do we want to be aligned with this guy? Are his goals our goals? Is his means our means? Like what's your read on who he was, why he did it? Like where did he come from? Like you said the religion is a major piece
Yeah.
of understanding why he was doing what he's doing. Let's go down there for a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, he's very much, a product of the Puritan roots that he comes from. I think there's some people who there's some debate about it. For the most part, it's pretty agreed upon that one of his ancestors was on the Mayflower, right? That there's this kind of connection back to one of these early settlements in America. He is very much along Calvinist lines, very much believes in predestination, about the sovereignty of God. It plays a huge role in kind of everything he writes and talks about. And that doesn't seem to prevent him from action. It seems to be kind of I will be the tool of God in the way I act in the world. So there's a major piece of that. I think his parents were probably a major influence, both in his abolitionist kind of upbringing, but then also his religious one as well.
Yeah. Like one other ancestor, just on the ancestry level, one other ancestor that's worth noting, and the one that he was named after, his grandfather, Captain John Brown, I believe both fought and died in the Revolutionary War. It's really interesting. I was going to pull this bit from a book out here, which partly was just to show you, because you've been moaning about one biography you've been reading that has, where just the biography's religious illiteracy is just completely like ruining his ability to even like make sense of Brown. And I was reading through this one the other day. So this is from To Purge This Land with Blood by Stephen B. Oates, which everywhere I looked at, like, this is the book, this is the one to read. This is like one of the great definitive biographies of John Brown. And this is in his introduction where he says, "We will never comprehend what Brown was about unless we take his religious views seriously. From earliest childhood, he learned to oppose slavery and to fear an all-wise, just, and all-powerful God. A God who demanded the most exacting obedience from the frail, wretched sinners he placed on trial in this world." Sounds like he read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. For the rest of his life, Brown was a devout Calvinist who believed in foreordination and providential signs, in the wrathful Jehovah of the Old Testament, who intervened in human affairs and directed them to suit his own purposes. And so he says he wants to give special attention in this biography to Brown's, not just Calvinist faith, but intense Calvinist faith, because I think it's the key to understanding him. He was a very serious about his religion.
Yeah, I mean, every single kind of account of people meeting him and speaking with him is filled with people noting his piety. Of course, it's also from the north, and so you get a little bit of the probably transcendentalist people who are like, "Oh, like this is a serious Christian. Like there's a guy who's taking this seriously," and yeah, he does not stop bringing it up.
Not just serious, because I mean, I'm sure there was some like kind of serious, but also like fully kind of like acculturated New England kind of like Christians that they'd met. But this is almost like a guy from a different age.
Yes.
A lot, like pretty much everyone, when they note John Brown's religion, they note like he was very much an Old Testament Christian, which is such a let's say like it's a funny turn of phrase, because I very much like to consider myself an Old Testament Christian as well in a lot of ways. I'm Team Moses all the way. But
well, I mean, in many ways, John Brown is fashioning himself as an Old Testament figure, or kind of following in those lines. There's like an element of like the patriarchs, where he has this gigantic family that he's kind of growing, and he has he's a shepherd. Like he's
Yes.
kind of trying to
Yes.
follow in those lines.
Oh. Yeah, no, it's really like he I don't know, did you come across much of his like actual like writing? Because again, like he was a man of action. So aside from like some like letters and documents, it's not like he wrote books.
I think
there.
for the most part it's letters. He might have a
Mhm.
journal entry here or there. I think there's some journal entries of his experiences kind of trying to get a loan, like those type of things. But yeah, for the most part it's letters back and forth between
Mhm.
him and his family, or supporters and things like that.
Yeah, no, I'd heard there's one. I've been trying to track this down, but somebody noted that he did. There was at one point where he basically wrote a somewhat autobiographical letter to one of his kind of younger supporters. It's kind of like this is the world that it came up from, but I wasn't able to track that down just yet. But I'm very interested to do so. Just John Brown's kind of like account of his childhood growing up. But it is, from the pieces I'm able to glean, it's one of this combination of a very sensitive soul. Like the animal thing is a really big thing. He was very compassionate and gentle towards animals. He had a very like one of the early greasy experience with, I think, a pet squirrel of his that died, that really kind of messed him up for a while. And just dealing with good.
I was gonna say, and there's all these stories too of him being able to tell his sheep apart from one another, that he could identify each one, and these experiences of the sheep like almost looking like it was dead, and then he would nurse it back to health, and everybody thought that the sheep was dead, all his family, and then the sheep would be running around the house.
Even stuff like that though is because of the way that his life ended, people immediately started like glorifying, puffing up his life. And so the question is like how it's a really good PR story that this guy who's trying to be a sincere Old Testament Christian is like, he knows all of his sheep by name, just like that other guy we all know. Like, he raised the sheep from the dead and stuff like that. But but there are less kind of like, I don't know, propagandistic accounts that do say like, yeah, no, he was pretty serious about caring for these gentle things. But you have this combination of just his childhood life gets harder and harder and harder. His mother dies early, or not early, like maybe around like 10 or 12 or 8 to 12, something like that. His father remarries a couple of times, and I think they make a note of the fact that he's just like, I did not connect with my stepmother. I kept mourning the mother that I lost throughout my life. And so it's this sensitive soul who keeps getting kind of like slapped in the face by grief.
Yeah. He has several children who die throughout his adult life. His wife.
He buried there's a dysentery story. He buries 4 children in 4 days, 6 to 9 year olds. Devastating. Like to the point where, that's in kind of the section I've got here about when it's sort of his radicalization period is just how he responds to the hardness of life. Because he had a massive family, and it was also wildly unsuccessful in everything that he did.
Yeah. I mean, we can go into that. Like, there's he tries to start a number of businesses. Almost like I don't know. It's hard not to read into it like get rich quick schemes almost. Like he has this idea for a business, and then it sounds great, and then he's able to convince somebody to go into it with him, and it fails, and then everybody ends up in more debt in the process. And it happens over and over and over again.
Yes. Yeah, no, one of the major books that I did read, the Impending Crisis, the lead up to the Civil War, who was a much more sober critic of Brown. And one of his deals is he makes a big sense of like how, like if you're gonna take John Brown seriously as a moral and religious person, you have to deal with sort of like the morality of how he conducted his financial businesses. And he
Yeah.
just has this list of like, okay, this is a lie. Like his funds came up short and he lied about it. Oh, he mortgaged this property and then sold to somebody else despite that. So he's got like, properties that he's selling to two different people at the same time and then refusing to vacate when the bank comes to calling and stuff like it's just now a lot of this is the sorts of things that what do you do when you're forced into financial destitution and your survival of your massive family is at stake. But on the one hand, you do have a guy who very publicly has really, really rigorous standards that he holds himself and others to.
Mm-hmm.
But he also can never live up to those standards.
I think that's a portion of it. I think there's also a level of there's a justification that he gives for it too, to himself of like I need to feed my family. Like there's a certain level of that comes up a couple times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is kind of like an anti. This is the thing that like W.B. Du Bois kind of hooks into, which is the almost like an early anti-capitalist critique, early industrialization critique. He kind of gets
into.
The
commie. Take us there. Go on.
So, well, no, but like he makes these critiques of like the way that the wool system works and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's developing these systems to try to avoid it, and so he gets frustrated with the way that these systems are working. Like I think he longs for a simpler time. And I think the fact that there is debt and that seems to be the only way to get forward. I think there is a certain level of he's pulled into this world, and that kind of pulls him down in the process.
I'm not sure if this is ironic or not, but sort of at least the party line in the South is that they are from a much older, like their economy is a much older way of life. It's more rural, it's more pastoral, it's less economically brutal. It's physically brutal on a particular population, but there's this weird like I don't know, like before he got radicalized, so like he would have made a great Southern boy.
Yeah, I mean,
again, at least the propaganda they had in the South. The truthfulness of that is beyond my historical knowledge at this point.
Well, and again, I'm not in the situations that John Brown was in, so I don't know to the extent. But there are a few moments where he's making good money and he's doing it well, and the debts are already stacked up, and it's just not enough to be able to pay off the debts, and so he has to take on another one of the schemes. And then it goes horribly, and it's like, well, if you had just stuck to the basic work, if you had done your shepherding business and you like. He was relatively well known for the quality, like the care he took of his sheep, and I think he won a contest in England for, when he went to England to kind of show off to try to sell some of his wool, and it was a failed venture. Okay. But in the process, he won a contest for his for one of his sheep that was very impressive, and so there are things that he was good at that he just never. He didn't never stick to it because it never made enough money to pay off the debt that was piling up.
Yeah.
I like Nick's comment here. John Brown needed Dave Ramsey's debt snowball. True. But he was borrowing for everybody. He was borrowing from his dad a lot, like thousands of dollars at a time in pre-Civil War money, which is
right,
not little.
Yeah. No, and it's one of those things. Like I think his dad ended up becoming this major pillar in his community. Was pretty successful at the end of his life, and that's the sort of thing that didn't transfer to his son for whatever reason. I mean, many such cases, but
yeah. Well, and I think there are also things where John Brown could have made money, and he took a principled stance not to. So there's certain things where, or he could have not spent money. So there's North Elba. There's lots of accounts of him paying for somebody else's land when they were going to get scammed. There's a lot of like charitable kind of acts that he did. But he was already not in a good financial state to be able to do that. And so there's this question of, is that best for your family? Like that you hear these things today still, like, is it a good thing to do that in the knowing what your means are at the moment? But
right. It's the put your own mask on first before helping others.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about his radicalization a little bit, because I think it was right around the time that he turned 30 that things really kind of took a turn.
Mm-hmm.
And from my reading, the big thing, again, it starts with national news, and this is probably the biggest sort of like violent action prior to John Brown. That was another incendiary event that kind of like really realized all of the the fears of the Southerners. And then in 1831 there was a slave revolt. This is Nat Turner was a slave who was also a preacher, who had a certain calling. Like from a very, very young age, he had this, like, based on like his account from his like court accounts, because he was captured and confessed before being hanged. But he was somebody who, from a very early age, according to him, had a certain kind of like spiritual aptitude that his family said might be prophetic, and so he's got this sort of kind of like mantle of, I am destined for great things. And around like
also looking for signs a lot, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And in 1827, 28, 29, he, according to his account, had numerous signs, prophetic visions, coded in the language of scripture. He was really kind of latched on to the seek first the kingdom of heaven and the rest of these things will be added to you. He's like, well, how do I seek first the kingdom? And had a vision where he got really caught up in Jesus's words that a day is coming when the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And he saw that as a sign to take up arms against the people that owned him. And so he gathered a small army, about 30 people, and he went on a rampage through a series of farmhouses throughout Virginia, and did some really vicious things. Like it's again, this is another event where it's being so far removed and just not being in his position at all. It's really, really hard to make any kind of a moral judgment. But I started reading about Nat Turner back in my pacifist days a little bit. I was starting to think about sort of like just war theory and stuff like that, and asking questions about like, what does it mean to engage in violence, but to do so justly?
Mm-hmm.
And usually that this was like early war and terror kind of period. And so I was kind of caught up in the world of like, anti-war libertarians and stuff like that. So that kind of like animating spirit at the time is kind of meshing with my grad school studies. So I was reading a lot of Mennonites and stuff like that. And so it starts with a period of being very critical of all of America's wars. Be like, there's no good reason to pick up arms against somebody else. We should have submitted to the British because of Romans 13 and stuff like that. And then started to think, the Civil War is one thing, but from the perspective of the group of people that are being occupied, they, at the very least, I think, have just cause to take up arms against their oppressors. I think you can make a pretty solid just war case for slave insurrections.
Mm-hmm.
But the complete and total indiscriminacy with which he slaughtered the people he came across, taking no account for men, women, children, even infants. It's again one of those things where if you actually like listen to the things that they say, it's hard to listen to the story and just be like, yeah, he was in the moral right. Hoorah, way to go. It's just so complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But this was, that Turner's slave revolt was massive news. It was a major radicalizing effect in the South. Like the South saw that as like, okay, this is why we need to batten that, like really kind of like buckle down. We're defending our way of life. We need to make sure this never happens again, which means a clamp down on the people that they're already oppressing. Well, at the same time, it's also, I think, causing them to radicalize their opinions. Like, they go from this is, to use a somewhat common turn of phrase, they were going from a period where slavery should be safe, legal, and rare to sort of like a shout your slavery sort of mood. Like, there's, I think, like 18, like a couple years later, you've got senators in the Senate, basically saying like this is just and right and good, and we should slave harder.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I'm thinking also of there's a few other events that kind of happen. There's a few slave revolts that are kind of
Mhm.
even international at that point, and you have
Was
the
the
Haitian revolt
Yeah.
is kind of the major one that people are
Mhm.
kind of pointing to, of like a revolt that took over an entire country at that point.
Yeah, succeeded.
Yeah. And so there's this John Brown is very much looking to figures like Nat Turner, Toussaint Louverture, these people as the I don't know, as saints almost to a certain extent. These people who kind of lived out this kind of freedom, that saw the horrors of slavery and fought against it.
Yeah. And one of those sort of just two things disconnected but happening at the same time is the Nat Turner Revolt happened not very long after William Lloyd Garrison started his abolitionist press. And so you have this major kind of like incendiary episode, and you just have this incredible firebrand of a preacher, journalist. I'm not sure quite how to describe him, but like this massive preacher of the injustice of slavery, and he definitely latched onto this episode. And so you have on the one hand like something that has caused everyone in the South to get terrified for what could potentially be coming. And then you have this massive voice in the North who's saying like, yes, 1,000 times yes, more of these and more is coming if you're not careful. So you have these, then they're seeing like, okay, not only is this bad, this violent uprising has happened, but now everyone in the North apparently is cheering it on and pushing for it to happen. And so you have this sort of like perfect mimetic cycle of like, we're scared, he's happy, and then they're just kind of like playing off each other and just spinning each other up for years.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's an interesting aspect too of the fact that the North is not is seen as relatively passive, even in Kansas to a certain amount. That they're almost too weak to do anything. That they're kind of the like we'll kind of kick them. You have the transcendentalists. You have all these like abolitionists who are kind of hands off. They're like, we're going to take a consent stance, but we're not going to actually like touch anything. Whereas very much the South is like, no, we'll do stuff. Like we'll send our people in. We'll do, and we'll show them what's up. And so there's this interesting like, yeah, there's this dynamic of like the abolitionists kind of cheering this on. It's almost like the threat then gets kind of the spotlight gets put onto the slaves themselves almost. That these people are the internal threat. That there's almost a lockdown on that end.
Yeah, I know, like I had this thought, especially thinking about like Garrison earlier today, like this because he was this like massive, like this mighty rhetorical voice, but he was just a talker, just a preacher, and I'm like, should we see him as a brave man? There's at least one point in time where he narrowly escaped being lynched by anti-abolitionist forces, but I mean, like in one sense, is he like a mighty voice of truth and justice, or is he just sort of like a parasite whose only job is to like pour gasoline on the political fires? Because on the one hand, like Garrison is an ardent pacifist. He is a Quaker. Like took very, very seriously the Jesus call not to resist evil. Yet at the same time, he sees other people taking up the sword, and he calls Nat Turner the first step in an earthquake that's going to set this country free. Like, and again, he's shouting after Harpers Ferry, like he hems and haws about Brown picking up guns, and then says, "I just disagree with his methods, but Brown has certainly shown us what time it is, and I thank God for what time it is." And I'm just like, what?
Well, and there's no. I think there's an element of like there's no skin in the game. Like Garrison is kind of, again, this is the argument that I think we would both have about the Transcendentalists too, that there's a certain level of, did they give up anything to have the opinions that they had? Like, did they, put anything at risk? And it seems like no, for the most part. Like, what's the risk of being an abolitionist in the North? It's, people not being happy with you. I think the most maybe would be if you fought the Fugitive Slave Act. I think that might have some implication that someone could come up and try to pick a fight with you, and you might face jail time. But beyond that, I think for the most part in the North, it was pretty tame.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what to make about people that are ardent pacifists that are also egging on the coming violent conflict. Seem to be excited to see it happen. I don't know how to. Again, like, history unfolded the way that it did, and so I don't know, like, how we move towards a more peaceful solution to these kind of like interminable moral quandaries in our day.
Yeah. Well, somebody asked in the chat about the sovereign. What was John Brown's idea of the sovereignty of God? And there's a little bit. I mean, he was very thoroughly for the sovereignty of God, very much Calvinist in that way. But there's in his reflection after Harpers Ferry fails, there's almost an understanding that it's like it didn't fail, right? It's exactly what it needed to be, and there's almost like a resignation. Like he's not disappointed. He's like, God's going to use it however he did, and God didn't let it succeed in the way I thought it was going to succeed, and that's okay.
And that's such a, again, it's got resonance with the cross. Like, one of the things that kind of like rhetorically Christians have going for us is that, like, we literally cannot lose. Because losing, like our greatest victory is founded in what was initially a tremendous failure. So, like, had he had like the material success where, like, oh yeah, no, he sees Harper's Ferry and now he's in control of this massive garrison, like just outside of Washington D.C., that's a major victory. But he's also fully resigned that, like, even if it doesn't, this could like end up inspiring what it ended up inspiring. It kind of like forced the hand and turns a rhetorical conflict into a like brutal and violent conflict.
Well, and that goes into that again, that interesting like the way that some people will write about John Brown is as if he's a Christ-like figure, and they'll make that analogy and they'll kind of follow it through, and you can kind of see those interesting echoes that people are kind of knitting together. You have the John Brown's Body song, where there's this idea of like his soul is marching on, like that he's not really dead, that he's actually with us here as we're doing this. The resigning to the government that it's going to hang him for treason, and being willing to do that, even given a way out, and he still doesn't take it. And then again, you have the fact that he's a violent criminal. Like, and so how do you like square the circle? Like, it's not like that. Yes, there are these connections that you can kind of draw to Christ, but then Christ is very much like not violent in that way, and you could maybe draw a connection to kind of casting the people out of the temple, like the animals out of the temple. But I think sometimes that's given a lot more weight than maybe we should. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the one role that Brown can't play is the innocent victim.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's talk about like some of that, I guess, the symbolism that seems to emerge from Brown's life and sort of like the frames you can view him in. So that was the big thing that really caught our attention, was just how, like, in some sense, like he tried, like the first name that comes up is like he effectively tries to play the role of Gideon. in a lot of ways. Gideon seems to be the biblical figure that most inspired him, that he seemed to gain a lot of kind of like meaning and sustenance out of. Like he saw that as an example that is repeatable if somebody's willing to put their life on the line the way that Gideon did.
And to the point where he even names a group of his, the Gileadites, in a like echo of that same story.
Right. That was I think it was the first time, I think it was after Dred Scott when they really started to force citizens of the North to participate in capturing and returning escaped slaves. And John Brown and his father were very active in the Underground Railroad, ferrying escaped slaves up to the north, up to Canada. And this was I think it was when he was in Ohio, I want to say.
That sounds right, I think.
Yeah, where he like basically put together I don't remember if it was an armed resistance. Again, the other question is, like, at what point does he start picking up arms? Because he did start his life as a pacifist.
Well, he did at some point have arms for. I remember reading accounts of Underground Railroad stuff where people would kind of come into the area. They knew to point the escaped slaves to John Brown, and he would take them in. Yep. And there'd be these stories of they would hear somebody coming down the road, and he would hand them guns, and he'd say, defend yourself if you have to. Go hide in the woods. If anybody comes and they're not me, then like there's a good chance something bad's going on. And so there is an element of like the inherent kind of self-defense of the Underground Railroad. You have Harriet Tubman, who famously would carry a shotgun through the Underground Railroad. But going back to the Gideon connection, I think is interesting too. There's I think the attack on Harpers Ferry is also kind of a Gideon-ish event of everybody kind of being thrown into panic at one moment, and same with Gideon as he launches his attack. Everybody is kind of going this way and that. I think they all end up killing each other in the Gideon story, but
But also kind of plays into like the low number sort of deal. Like he's got this image of Gideon so fixed into, like, he was trying to gather more men, and it was sort of like his attempt to take Harper's Ferry hit like setback after setback. They were planning to take it like a year and a half earlier, and then something happened in the ranks of his supporters that forced it. Like basically, like, you need to get out of town right now. And some of his supporters are like, I think this is the end of the Harper's Ferry nonsense. And he went back to Kansas, and Kansas remembered him. Was like, we want nothing to do with you. And so he like came right back and went back to work. But it's like, there was a huge like momentum killer. Like he kept trying to recruit more troops, and it just never quite solidified to the point where it's like, we'll go with what we have. And part of it's having that image of like, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, the Lord will provide.
I'm trying to think of any other kind of pieces of that story. I think there's an interesting analogy with Gideon's children. That Gideon tries to set up his children as kind of he sets himself up as like the ruler, and his children kind of go forth, almost like misleading his children in some way. There's kind of the question of his children kind of leave Christianity, and John Brown kind of struggles with this, like how he is as a father, where he's led his children. And so that's another kind of complicated layer of this kind of relationship as well.
I mean, that's one of those things that's so interesting, that he is like, again, like if nothing else, John Brown is a devout and serious Christian. And based on some of the sources that I read, like none of his parents followed him in Orthodox Christian faith. Many of them openly mocked him. So they disavowed his religion, but they did not disavow his politics.
Yeah. They remained very staunch, abolitionists all the way through, which is yeah. Yeah, it's
the question of like, I don't know, like what's the real religion? What's the real spirit animating him? Um, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, it's like I just have this long list of different kind of like frames to look through. Like there's him taking inspiration from Nat Turner's revolt and the Haitian revolt. A lot of sort of like the Transcendentalists saw him as a sort of like American Oliver Cromwell, like the Puritan crusader who was here to, set us free. They saw him as this sort of like crazed Scottish Highland chieftain, sort of like a Braveheart.
Which kind of goes into the almost the John Wayne kind of analogy too. Again,
Yeah.
this idea of this isn't necessarily the guy that we want running the whole thing all the time, but this is the guy we need right now, who's going to do the thing that we need him to do.
Well, that's the what's the new the John Wayne movie with Jimmy Stewart? Because it's the whole deal is it's going to bother me because I know it. Because John Wayne is the lawman. John Wayne is the gunfighter, and Jimmy Stewart is the lawyer. He's the guy who's the next level in civilization. Mm-hmm. And part of the problem is you have this guy who is just this sort of like satanic, anarchic embodiment of evil. And it's obviously the job of the John Wayne lawman to kill him. And the way the story goes, it's actually Jimmy Stewart, the lawyer, who's supposed to abide by the rule of law and whatnot, who I think in some dishonorable way kills the satanic, anarchic villain. And then they indulge in this kind of like noble lie because they need so that John Wayne can play his mythic role, and so that Jimmy Stewart can go on to like play his proper role as order, justice. It's really bothering me that I can't remember the name of the movie. They're probably screaming in the chat. But
there's 3 movies that got put in chat. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
That's it. Liberty Valance. Okay. Yep.
I also thought about the Dark Knight, that there's a certain level of the lie that Two-Face is the lawyer and kind of goes crazy, but they kind of whitewash his legacy at the very end because they need some sort of figure to look up to that is not a subversive figure, but is a holy martyr. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think it's an intentional illusion.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what did we? I was trying to remember any other piece about Cromwell. I think that one's a super interesting one. That was just the thing that popped up, and it's sort of like with so many things, it's sort of like I don't know how Cromwell was considered in America at this point in time. But the Transcendentalists, I think specifically, they saw him as representing the individual freedom aspect, and they also saw his religion as a expression of their transcendentalism. That it was the defined call to
Cromwell imprisoned first, a Catholic or a Transcendentalist. Come on.
My God! It's this. And part of that Chaucer, right? That there's a certain level of whitewashing that Chaucer did all at once that kind of got super popular, and then all the Transcendentalists kind of were like, "Oh, this is the hidden history that has been handed to us, and we are going to we understand the real history."
We need a Sam Tiedemann read on Oliver Cromwell stat.
Well, I think Nickel liked this, but that's a quote that I handed Skankenstein earlier. Well, I'm gonna read part of it.
Yeah, grab it.
Well, there's another attitude towards the records of the past, and I have never been able to understand why it has not been more often adopted. To put it in its curtest form, my proposal is this: that we should not read historians, but history. Let us read the actual text of the times. Let us, for a year or a month or a fortnight, refuse to read anything about Oliver Cromwell except what was written while he was alive. There's plenty of material from my own memory, which I have all I have to rely on in the place where I write. could mention offhand many long and famous efforts of English literature that cover the period. Clarendian's history, Evelyn's diary, the life of Colonel Hutchison. Above all, let's read all of Cromwell's own letters and speeches and Carlyle published them. But before we read them, let us carefully paste pieces of stamp paper over every sentence written by Carlyle. Let us blot out in every memoir, every critical note, and every modern paragraph. For a time, let us cease altogether to read the living men on their dead topics. Let us read only the dead men on their living topics. Which is a very, I mean, you know, as much as I like that, I'm like, that's not how I went about researching John Brown. I do like the context as well to be able to. And
there are certain figures that actively frustrate that, and I think John Brown is one of them. I mean, this Chesterton writing, right?
Yes.
I mean, I kind of think like he wrote a biography of St. Francis, and St. Francis is another figure where, like, first off, because he's such a dramatic performance artist actor, it's hard to get like a solid history of him because of how much he is not just acting, but intentionally performing a role, I want to say. And like, I feel like Francis is somebody who's very conscious of, like, he's intentionally trying to live a life that deeply alludes to Jesus.
Yes.
And so the question is, like, knowing that's part of his intent and where he's, and the question, like, the man behind the mask sort of question. And I'm not sure how true it is, because it seems like Cromwell is somebody who was also very immediately sort of like a lot of myths were made out of him.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Chesterton is also, he has his war on the history books. That I think there's a quote of his that say this is something along the lines of like only like lunatics write history books. That like it's the tradition that keeps the real history alive or something like that. So I think there's a bit of that war going on there too. I think next on our list of these symbols was the Holy Fool.
Yes.
That's very much John Brown in many respects. Yeah.
This is where kind of like the Americanness of it all comes in. Like, how many other holy fools pick up a gun?
True.
But again, like, some of that is like, is that because he is an American that like the gun is part of the holy fool's repertoire over here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like all of our kind of cultural saints are, for the most part, right? Other than maybe like Martin Luther King, I think is kind of one major exception. Like George Washington is very much he's a military general. Most of them are kind of violent figures. Maybe not as violent as John Brown was in that context, but
I mean, usually I want to say like the American myth is a certain sort of like resigned violence. And you can't, like, with Martin Luther King Jr., like, there's more than just his action. Like, there's other books that, like, I read this one book called, like, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, which is about the fact that there were plenty of, sort of like Black Panther type movements where it, like Martin Luther's nonviolent demonstrations were against the backdrop of other riots, other violent uprisings. And some of that was kind of providing the question, like, no, I think there's times where I want to say maybe even in like the letter to the Birmingham jail where Martin Luther King Jr. basically says, do you want to deal with me in my nice clean suits, or do you want to deal with those guys and their guns?
Yeah.
And so in a sense, like, how those two are not parasitic, but they're working together in some sense. Yeah. And they're playing off of each other.
I mean, I think about Francis of Assisi, going back to that, and the Crusades. That they're hand in hand. That there's a moment where Saint Francis wants to be martyred, and so he runs into the middle of this battle and gets captured by the enemy.
Didn't he get injured on a crusade? Is that how his story starts?
I don't think so. I think he's just kind of a rich kid. That's how his story starts.
Okay, might have. I know that, and that's also like Francis is also like in like Dante, like the Franciscans are paired with the Dominicans, who are a little bit more. They have a different way of renovating Christendom.
Mhm.
You know, adamant preaching, maybe some inquisitions. A little bit less like flower power when it comes to heretics, the way that Francis did.
Yeah. But diving into the Holy Fool, yeah, it's again, it's hard to deal with the violence, like, and there's this kind of complexity to John Brown that it's like you want to be able to kind of put him into a box, but you can't really fit him into anything in particular easily.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the big question that kind of like stalks most of his biography is like, how sane was he?
Mhm.
And that's something that was explicitly brought up. What did at his trial? Like, did
Yeah.
his lawyer try to pull the insanity defense?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
he absolutely rejected it.
He stood up and was like, "I'm not insane." His wife, I think, was asked to testify to try to save his life to claim that he was insane, and she refused as well, because she said it would be, you know, a denial of the truth of the matter, and yeah. So there is an element of people trying to find out what the angle is on why is he so different than, like, why is he so dissident? Why, like, what is the nature of that?
Yeah. Now, in the impending crisis book, one kind of like broaching the question of like, how sane was he? One of the things that author noted is that it's just there's a lot of people that wanted to call him crazy. That had a lot of people on different sides that had good reasons. So you have those who wanted to save Brown's life, like his defense lawyer that tried to call him insane and provide evidence for that. The collaborators whose fates are bound up with Brown, like his funding network, wanted to call him insane to save themselves. And you also have critics in the South who want to discredit his actions by calling him insane. So you have people north, south, close to him, far away from him, that are all like have very, very good reason to get on the record that he was a crazy guy.
Oh, and then for the opposite reasons as well, except for his defense. But like the there are people in the North who want to say he's not insane because they want to kind of push this forward. The Transcendentalists being one of them. And then you have the people in the South who also want to kind of push towards a war of some sort or a conflict, and they say, you know what, like, yeah, and he didn't have 19 men, he had 30, or like, there's that aspect too.
Well, the other thing I've got here is that, like, if he is a lunatic, so are 25% of Massachusetts men. Like like a lot of people are staying in hearty agreement with what he has done. It's kind of hard to piece out.
Well, and then the argument against that might be that they weren't there, right? Like, they can say all they want, but like, John Brown and his sons and the couple other guys who went with him, right? They're the ones who actually did it. And so, are they the crazy ones for actually doing it? And or is it all just Massachusetts talk? That's the other one.
Yeah, he's so crazy. He actually acted on what everyone believes in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, like the question of like, it's really hard to even like judge his sanity. Really fits in well with the question of like, how much of a holy fool was he? And on the one hand, you got people that are really kind of underscoring like his tactics are sound, but at the same time, there's other folks who are like, this is the dumbest revolution I've ever seen. You don't try to incite a slave insurrection where you don't tell the slaves you're freeing that they're going to be free. Like, you have to talk to these people first. They're not just going to magically pick up arms and join you. And that was, I think, one of the things they discovered is that, oh no, this wasn't like he wasn't, the vanguard, the will of the people. Like, the folks that were freed were like, we do not want to pick up those pikes. We don't want to join you. We don't want to hang with you.
Yeah.
Like literally, legally, not just like informally. It's like, we do not want to go down in your crusade, Mr. Brown. Thank you for freeing us, but we would like to leave.
I think there's only 2 freed slaves that joined the attack, and I think they both ended up dying at some point. I think one tried to swim across the Potomac to try to get away and didn't make it. I think another one got wounded, and I think he died in the engine house. And so it was not the mass showing that I think John Brown was expecting out of it.
Yeah, no. Like everything I said, like he was wildly unrealistic. He just pulled numbers out of his ass about how many folks were going to join him. It's like, yeah, no, after the end of the first night, 300 people will be joining us. It's like, you didn't bring food for your 20 guys, let alone the 300 people that are joining you.
Yes. That was something else that was stated that I remember reading a quote about, that he didn't pack rations as if he was awaiting manna from heaven. That there's a certain almost like I don't know how much of that was him, or how much is read into it, but there's a certain level of like, it's just going to work out. Like I'm going into this, and if it works out, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And you also have the weird aspect of John Brown. It seems like he's planning this for years. Like just he had mentioned it in several places, and this had been on his mind, and I wouldn't put it past him that he had some sort of vision or something, that he's like, that Harpers Ferry is where I need to be. And his whole life, for a certain amount of it, was kind of all pointed that direction. He's pretty heavy set on it.
Yeah.
One anecdote that I think would be interesting to bring up is the vision that Harriet Tubman had about John Brown. Before she met him, she had this dream of 3 snakes. One was the old man's head, and 2 next to him with younger men's heads, and they are struck down and killed. But they are looking at her almost like with like expectation or joy or something like that. And she didn't know who they were, and then she met John Brown, and then was like, oh, that's who that was. And then I think she wasn't able to join the raid because she was sick. And so when he asked, and so there's this interesting kind of another religious kind of interesting angle of what does it mean for John Brown to be represented as a snake in a vision. There's the mixed symbolism of that, because snakes can be good and snakes can be really bad, and
Yeah, no, I think Nat Turner also had visions of snakes, according to his testimony. But yeah, no, like as far as I know, he didn't actually mention any sort of like visions that he had, but the certain, I don't know, like the amount of visionary experiences that motivate political events in the lead up to the Civil War. I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah.
Like, how do we, like, who's going to go out there and write our charismatic Pentecostal history of the Civil War? Because there's some juice there.
Yeah. And I think if you take a Calvinistic perspective, I think if you take John Brown's perspective on this, I think there is a certain amount that I think he's willing to resign and say, like, maybe I didn't do the right thing, but God put me in the place he did, and he used me as he did. And it led to the outcome it did. Like there's a certain amount of like, yeah, it seems like everything is like a set of dominoes, and they're all falling towards a civil war. And if you frame it that way, it seems to line up. But then you come to the ultimate question about like how much, like, but you're also making decisions. Like you are a person. Like you chose to do this. Did it have to happen this way? Yeah.
Okay. So let me jump into my like theory about King David in the Old Testament. So it's sort of like the question, like the amount of kind of like echoes and allusions between David's life and Jesus' life are really, really profound. They're really, really deep, and they're just kind of like they're all over the place. They keep kind of like popping up and popping up and popping up. And the cynical part of me is just like, oh, that's pure, on the one hand, literary construction on like on the part of the gospel writers. And on the other hand, you also have the fact that Jesus himself is an active participant in what he's doing, so he could be actively performing Davidic symbolism left and right. But there's a bunch of other stuff that are just much much deeper than that. They go outside the bounds of what the gospel writers, as far as I can tell, could organize, or what Jesus could, through, if he were just a human being, tap into. And so the question, like, what's going on there? How did David's life so deeply anticipate and presuppose in the historical unfoldings of his event? So we're kind of playing around this idea of like David somehow so kind of like deeply tapped into the logos, his sort of like deep passionate commitment to God, kind of like made his life that he was and he was a very active participant. Like he was a guy who kind of like made a lot of bold actions. He was a very like, and sometimes went very, very renegade, but still like, I feel like because he was so adamantly kind of like tapped into the logos, he sort of like made his life, his history, a vessel through which like ultimate reality could express itself.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's something I'm, like speculatively playing around with, thinking about David. But then I look at John Brown and all the ways that at the very least, like Gideon kind of emerges. Yep. Like the amount of luck that is involved in Brown getting to do the things that he could do. The fact that John Brown survived, I'm pretty sure like John Brown would have, like, he was hit in the head with a sword in the Harpers Ferry raid. And the reason they didn't cut his head off was because the guy who caught John Brown was like rushing to the battlefield that day and grabbed his like ceremonial dress sword rather than his actual like battle saber. And so like he was just, like he hit him with like a shiny dowel rod, but he fully intended, like, it's just a question of like when you start to pile up like weird, again, moments of chance, of happenstance, and you're like, what's like.
Well, he also has he's a bit of a Ben Carson kind of analogy too, of the going for the knife and the knife hitting the belt buckle, like that also is part of the story as well. As he's being stabbed, the sword breaks on the belt buckle, and there's a certain element of like he's allowed to live through this. So he can face trial and potentially, like now he's able to, he gets a bunch of interviews, he gets to talk about whatever he wants.
Like that gives him a bit of kind of like control over his own narrative.
Yes.
And we'll say like he milks that, but that is a crucial part in his story being what it is.
Yeah.
Is that you have all these people who could just be like, oh, he's a crazy guy. They can't write him up because they talked to him, because they saw how he composed himself. They saw how he willingly accepted his death, where he was not. I guess that is where even then you sort of get the like Christ led like a lamb to the slaughter, is sort of like how John Brown composed himself on the way to the gallows.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a way that you could see this even critically of John Brown, that, like vessels made for destruction or something like that, where it's like you could even see him as a bad figure, but then also see that, he seems to be being used by God, or, whatever, like the spirits lead him a place, and God is ultimately kind of in charge, and he lets the things fall where they do, and it ends up bringing about the Civil War. I mean, there's also a point too where Neil was talking about the relationship with Lincoln, that there is a certain element too of there's arguments to be made that if John Brown didn't have his raid on Harpers Ferry, that it wouldn't have set up the political environment for Lincoln to have been elected in the first place. And so there is like an intimate link there too.
I mean, this is one of those really, really fraught times where this conflict, this powder keg could have exploded in 100 different ways. And the fact that it went the way that it did, I don't know.
Well, and it's interesting because there's this this other element of I think we talk about Civil War today, and we kind of make these comparisons. But then you look at Kansas. Kansas was basically the Civil War before the Civil War happened. Like, it was all kind of there already.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And they were like outright just like, yeah, we're fighting now. I mean, John Brown is, I think it was Blackjack where he was fighting like basically full on American troops, and had his like little band of abolitionist soldiers or free state soldiers, and they're hiding in the brush, and he's I think he's hit in the shoulder at one point in the fight, and he ends up getting away with it because there happens to be somebody who's in charge who like is somewhat favorable to his positions, and yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah.
Mark is saying the romanticizing of American history through a biblical lens is very American.
Hey, that's everybody who has a Christian background. This is another thing is assuming like treating things that are pretty universal, but because when they're done by Americans, it's suddenly very American. But also, I mean,
we discovered it, so you know.
Yeah. But I mean, but again, like part of the things is like, you know, again, like looking at John Brown, it's hard not to see biblical logic bubbling up from the raw events of history in a way that, again, makes, well, what does it mean that you have just before the Civil War effectively a biblical judge emerging onto the scene, behaving like that, and against all odds, like doing things that they do bring God's judgment on the people. And he's just like the rest of the biblical judges. He's a flawed guy with feet of clay, who is like, he's not the perfect warrior. He's a guy who's got his own foibles, and I don't know. Maybe that's a lens for asking like how his foibles are also mixed in with the character of America. Because I think in judges, like in some sense, you're supposed to see every judge as the embodiment of Israel, flaws and all.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I think is fascinating too is I don't know. I think Potawatomi is kind of one of these events that makes John Brown really hard to swallow for a lot of people, of this kind of night of intense violence against people who are unarmed, kind of crossing enemy lines and like grabbing people out of their homes and things like that. But there is an element of the judges kind of in all of that. I think about the end of Judges, where you know the prostitute is split up. There's a certain element of that being put in there.
Go on, finish your thought.
Well, I'm even the beginning of Judges, where you have Eglon is assassinated by the left-handed judge, who kind of slyly kind of puts a knife into him, and no one notices until long after he's gone, and it ends up leading to a battle that happens that is led by this judge. Forget his name. So, I feel bad, but
so Nat Turner, apparently after he was hung, he was dismembered, and the various parts that were dismembered were sent off to various next of kin victims.
Interesting.
I just saw that. I'm like, is that common practice? Did we do that? I
mean, the only other person I can think of is Thomas Paine, who did that, or who had that happen to him, where he died, he didn't get a proper burial, and then everybody kind of just has a piece of him. But that's more of a punishment on Thomas Paine than it was any other message that's being sent.
It's definitely. I mean, it was definitely like meant to like dehumanize like Nat Turner as well. But at the same time, do we also get an unintentional like end of Judges sort of like symbolism at the moment when Israel is tearing itself apart?
Yeah. So there are a lot of echoes through there.
Yeah. Well, should we open up and let some of these other jokers in?
Sure. I mean, I think we should hit one of these. I think it would be good to hit con artist. I think is an interesting.
Okay.
I thought.
Yeah.
There's the get rich quick scheme kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But then also there's a brutal honesty that he has or seems to have that is also kind of at play as well. That even
The thing is, with his financial dealings, his Christian demand for absolute honesty hits a ceiling, and he crumples there.
Yeah.
And like there's like there again, like one of my more critical biographies is just okay, yeah, no, like he's a guy who held himself to very rigorous abstract moral standards that he was not strong enough in his own character to live up to. And one of the moments where his weakness really won out was, as he described, as like when he got really, really like when his life hit the ultimate stress, like he was ultimately like financially dishonest in a number of ways.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can hop things in. I'm going to put this up.
Yeah.
Violence is very bad. Don't
Okay.
do it. We'll make sure that's very clear for a moment.
Yeah. I'll just run through my list here as well, because I was just thinking, because part of the thing is like this is partly just a shout out to the rest of the world that what we've been thinking about for the last month. And it was pretty hastily thrown together because we realized it'd be perfectly on theme to celebrate the hastily thrown together Harpers Raid Ferry by throwing together a hasty Harpers Raid stream. But just kind of like through, like John Brown is just such a dense life. There is so much, there's so many themes, there's so many American spirits that are kind of flowing through him that just some of the things that I kind of like noticed that deserve a lot of attention on their own is just a bit closer attention to John Brown's family heritage. I think we could easily do an hour on that. Like we didn't intend to talk about Kansas at all, and Kansas kept showing up. Kansas was a wild couple of years. Last week, like Kansas became the most fascinating place on the planet for about a week for me. I was shocked. It was incredible. We even talk about like the Secret Six, his George Soros USA funding network.
Yeah. Which included what was it? Like 2 Unitarians, 2 businessmen, a physician. I can't remember what the occupation of the last guy was. Like a teacher, I think.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of material to like just diving deeper into John Brown's relationship with the Transcendentalists. The idea of again, like this self-proposed like historical actor in the midst of all these like thinky talky spaces, and the relationship between like the guy crazy enough to pick up a gun and all the people are like, good, I like your ideas. I'm not going to fund you. I'm not going to pick up a gun to join you, but I still like the cut of your jib insofar as it doesn't affect me at all.
I was reading today about an instance where he was asking for money. They said, what are you going to use it for? And he says, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to use it for whatever I want to use it for. And they ended up giving him $5,000, and then they didn't actually end up giving him $5,000 because they ran out of money. So they only gave him $150. It's just like, here, take it.
Well,
just go.
Yeah, and again, like just like John Brown's an interesting character to lens through which we kind of get access to some of I think like the major spirits that animate America, from like the politics of abolition, and really just a certain sort of because abolition is connected to things like prohibition, teetotaling, stuff like that. A certain Puritan, like absolute abstinence when it comes to certain things. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I mean, good. Also early women's suffrage was also kind of tied into there, like heavily with temperance as well. John Brown was known to kind of hang out around like early feminist speakers and stuff.
His I think his sister or stepsister was one of the first female graduates of Oberlin College.
Yeah, I mean, he would travel significant distances to like just listen to a woman kind of speaking on like women's political kind of talking points. Yeah, it's interesting. He's very much in that realm, but then holds these very like again it's on the document. We didn't talk about it, but like the religious fundamentalism is very strong in John Brown as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But again, it's such an interesting fundamentalism because for us today, that usually connotes somebody who is like incredibly conservative, has, oh, I guess, Old Testament in a bad sense views on everything. And again, like John Brown is constantly known as like an Old Testament Christian, but an Old Testament Christian who wants to free all the slaves, Old Testament Christian who fully believes in women's right to vote and suffrage.
And I mean,
it's
didn't go to church also. Like that was a major kind of piece as well of his story, is that he went to church, had this kind of significant experience of seeing segregation within a church population, sought to break that, had this very uncomfortable kind of relationship with that church, and then eventually after he left the area, his membership to the church was revoked. And then from that point on, he was not interested in going to church, and his family very much had a aversion to it.
Had he not picked up a gun, I think it'd be pretty easy to call him a saint, honestly. Like a holy fool, St. Francis Saint, had he not done the Harpers Ferry raid. Now it's just kind of like...
Well, and the other stuff.
Well, before Kansas. Yeah, right. Prior to Kansas, I guess. But like, yeah, in like the first 45, 50 years of his life. But that's the other thing. Like he radicalized, like he became like a violent political radical when he turned like 50.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's one thing to be like, oh yeah, no, a 20-year-old gets like a lot of hot under the collar and like picks up a gun, but it's like no, like he spilled first blood when he was like 45.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, like when he like raised his hand in church and said, "I commit my life to the destruction of slavery." He was almost 40 when that happened.
Well, I'll have to tell the story about there's a anecdote about how he's traveling around the Boston area, I think, and he's asked to teach at like a school. I don't know what the circumstances are where you just invite John Brown in to kind of cover for a class or something, but he does, and it's a bunch of younger children, and he gives a lesson on the evils of slavery. So he tells them all about the slave trade. He teaches them about how the God of the American is also the God of the African, that there is this kind of like the sovereignty of God is over everything. And so you have to treat them with respect. I'm assuming the golden rule came in there because that was a major piece for him. And then he asked the children to raise their hand to say, like, raise your hand if you want to fight slavery or something like that. And a bunch of kids raised their hand, and then he whittled it down again. And he said, raise your hand if you are willing to give your life for the destruction of the slavery institution. And I think 2 boys raised their hands, and he puts his hands on their heads and says, I bless you in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit, that you will grow to fight this great evil in our country. And it's, yeah, he's just almost out of time. Like he doesn't really fit in anywhere. Like he's Neil said, woke teachers.
Yeah. Sure.
The great part about the biography I've been reading is we talk about his illiteracy of religion, and I've told this anecdote to Skankenstein too. But his takeaway from that story is that John Brown is not racist, and I feel like there's a little bit more than that, but
I feel like you could have drawn that from many, many other episodes of his life.
Yes, the Gideon connection again. Yeah, whittling down the children. Yeah. I put the link in chat. I don't know how to tell if people are hopping in or not, but I'm sure we can keep going too.
Oh, that's who it is. Oh, there he is. Right on. I knew who that is.
Wait, is there somebody here that I can't see?
No. My buddy Cole's in the chat there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm on my phone, so I haven't been able to see what any of you guys have been yammering about. Say the workbench is still a work in progress, but you can see my face this time.
You have down Spartacus as a mythical frame or symbolic
Mhm.
connection.
Well, I mean that's another famous slave revolt.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
So it's one of the things that after he left Kansas and he started kind of like milling around and sort of like studying up and getting ready for Harper's Ferry, he started to like look at past military campaigns, and Spartacus was one of the things that he studied.
Mm-hmm.
And so he sort of expected much more of everyone else that he freed to start shouting out, "I'm Spartacus too," and they're like, "No, thank you. You prefer to just be a farmer out there."
The piece that you reminded me of was also the guerrilla warfare aspect of all this.
Mm-hmm.
That he was very much on the realm of this will not be a lining up on the field of battle and everybody
Mm-hmm.
shooting at each other. That this is going to be a resistance movement. I think he was very much in the realm of like small. It's going to be a small group, but we're going to be well protected, and we're gonna do that. And that's kind of how he.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how he behaved all through Kansas and
Yep.
Harper's Ferry as well. That was kind of his
Mm-hmm.
philosophy around it all.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, like that's the only way like he could tactically survive. Like he doesn't have an army to do like a go toe to toe. But I think that was sort of like the plan is like once he got out of Harper's Ferry is to take to the hills and resist forever.
He has a quote that he told Frederick Douglass that those mountains were put there by God as a safe haven for the slaves, or the escaping slaves. That he had this image of the I guess universal history that it was preordained from the beginning of time that this would be the place for this. It didn't play out that way, but it does reflect something on his character or his mindset at least.
Yeah. It's when you don't realize you're the holy fool until it's too late, I guess.
I think one thing that we haven't mentioned is the Washington connection in Harper's Ferry.
Oh yes! Oh my gosh!
Do you want to go into that?
Well, it's just the fact that like he went in Harper's Ferry, one of the prominent citizens is somebody who was a indirect, 'cause he didn't have any direct descendants, but an indirect descendant of George Washington. And it was like John Brown purposefully went out of his way to make sure that they captured George Washington's grandnephew, who was a slaveholder. And they also made sure to get out of the way to snag a holy artifact, like a sword that was given to George Washington by, I think, Frederick the Great.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think two pistols as well. I heard something about that.
Okay,
I don't know
didn't
what
hear
was
about
behind
the
the pistols, but I had read something that he thought they were talismans of some sort.
Oh, okay.
But similar to the sword, I think that there's some sort of like religious or kind of spiritual significance to these items that were handed down.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, he also what did he do? Write his own constitution for his new nation, effectively.
Yes, his group.
Yeah, and it's again they're intending to refound the nation in a
also not resist it.
Right. Okay, it's almost like trying to build like the next state, and it's a very, from what I understand, like an incredibly like Spartan, like Sparta of Greece, sort of like military theocratic, like war state or something like that.
Well, there's accounts of these like meetings that they had as they're writing this constitution, and somebody says like I don't want to be, or I think in the constitution or the draft or whatever that they were reading out that they were voting on, it said something like we are ultimately kind of obedient to the nation, and somebody said in the group, I don't want to fight for the nation that kept me enslaved, right? And then John Brown spoke up and he gave his speech on like, no, like the revolution led up to this point that like the Declaration of Independence speaks to the original intent, and we are trying to restore the nation. And then I think it was Du Bois said something along the lines of like, and that was that. And like at that point, like nobody said anything else. They were like, okay, he's kind of spoken his mind, and yeah, it kind of made the decision for everybody at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of so like with Kansas, amongst other things, the sort of deals like once you open up a new territory, it's a little bit like whoever can put together the most effective governments before statehood is like offered basically gets it. So you would have like, I mean, Kansas effectively had like two shadow governments that were dueling for supremacy. And so basically it's just like, a bunch of people that are kind of like creating their own constitution, creating their own governments, and hoping that they're the one that gets official recognition once they become a state. And so that was going on in Kansas. And then part of the problem was that because you had the southern and the northern contingents in Kansas, you had two somewhat equally powered dueling governments that were going on. And so I don't know if that's kind of what was in the back of his mind when he was putting together this. He's effectively like, we are, making a new state here. Like we're carving this out of Virginia.
Well, I don't know. I don't remember which constitution this was, because it could be the group that was hiding under the auspices of being a Masonic lodge for the free black men in the area, or like an analogous organization.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also
right, that was
yeah.
Yes. Right. Well, this pretense for starting or like the
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's also a brief thing worth mentioning is his relationship to the Masons. Like he's a Mason for a little bit and then ends up leaving after a controversy. But he has these like connections to these institutions, right? Of like the Masons have been pretty well linked in America since the founding, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost his moral character is what kind of keeps him out of it, which I think is another fascinating bit of his detachment, I guess, based off of his conscience. Yeah,
but again, like at that point in time, then he's bothered by because it was the guy that was apparently murdered, at least allegedly, by the Masons, that caused him to want nothing to do with them. And that was when he first picked up a gun, I want to say, when he started to arm himself in self-defense because he was concerned about what would happen after not just rejecting, but like forcefully publicly denouncing the Masons.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's when he first kind of armed himself. It's a little bit of a controversy with his abolition or his pacifist father. But that's, I don't know, maybe that's like once you get bit by the self-defense bug, because there's that, and he's also, so like the thing that radicalized him to the point of going up in that church and saying, I commit my life to the destruction of slavery when he was 37 was at a special church service that was called as a response to the lynching of an abolitionist in like Illinois. Yeah, he was kind of shuttled back and forth between slave Missouri and free Illinois. So he's on the banks of the Mississippi. And so it was Lovejoy, I want to say. Okay.
Well, I was gonna say it might be good to dig into a little bit of John Brown's like childhood and what led him up to that, because I think there is this very multicultural upbringing he has with like native tribes nearby where he lived, saw how they were being mistreated, yet at the same time was very integrated with them to the point that his parents were almost concerned because he's wearing Native American clothing and is like running around there. And so there's that element. And then he has this early encounter, the story of being invited into this home that owned slaves, and he sees the way that they mistreat this boy who is his own age.
Here we go.
And he sees this kind of distinction between their very generous, kind treatment to him, and their like demeaning, horrible treatment to this person who's closer to them for all intents and purposes, right? Like that he lives and serves them, and it's these kind of early moments in his life that kind of build him up to this place.
Yeah. I think we're good, man. If no one else wants to join us, then not sure I have much else to say at this point other than
I'll put it in one more time, and then I'll bring up just an anecdote or two, and then we'll close it if nobody wants to hop on.
Yeah. I'll just say one of the other things that I quickly discovered that I'm a little excited about is the amount of post-Civil War American epic poetry that I am now aware of. I now have like two books here. First off, a whole book of Civil War poetry by Herman Melville of Moby Dick fame. And this one I'm really excited about. This is Stephen Vincent Benet, who has this. It's an extended epic narrative poem that goes throughout the entire Civil War, and looking at the way in which summarize his impact on. Well, here's the thing. He's sort of like memory hold a little bit. He started the Civil War, and that's his major impact. Like that's like he lit the fuse that blew up. Now it's something that had been building and building and building, but his was definitely, I guess, like again, like could be the efficient cause of Lincoln getting elected. But that's the major thing that he's responsible for. He was very quickly eulogized, lionized by a lot of the intellectuals. So in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, like he was incredibly popular for the next at least like 50 years. People knew who he was, wrote songs about how great he was, how important he was, how inspiring he was. But 50 years on, I don't think he's really a household name unless you kind of like know the John Brown's Body song.
I think it was stated somewhere. I don't know how verifiable this is, but somebody was saying that he was probably the best known American, like outside of America, before Lincoln. Like there was a certain amount of like there wasn't a. It was a pretty brief time between the two, to be honest. He made the news enough that people internationally knew his name. But yeah, I mean,
that's at this point it's sort of like a thing I'd like to kind of like dig into a little bit. It's sort of like, how did people consider John Brown? I mean, what did you send me something where like Charles Spurgeon wrote something about John Brown and stuff like that?
Yes, Charles Spurgeon was a very avid John Brown supporter, and spun up some controversy over it with his American readers.
Yeah, but I mean, I know like part of the question, and half the reason that I think we both got so fascinated is the question: is he continuing to have an impact on history? Like the fact that we've seen his memes kind of pop up as inspiration for political violence, because that's the thing that he's famous for. Like, I don't know, the biggest kind of conclusion I've come to, despite the fact that Brown is a massive enigma, is Brown is somebody who has proven like his meme has become incredibly politically useful for a lot of people. But the more you kind of like look at the person, the more he becomes just so complicated. It's so many ways.
It's almost like the spirit is John Brown Jr. and not John Brown. Like there is the skeptic, I'm not interested in religion, but I'm gonna still take up the violent aspect. But and then there's also the element of he goes crazy, John Brown Jr. And he has a bout of insanity for a good bit there. I think that kind of echoes what we might be seeing
And no, that was a response to like an incredibly distaste, like his first taste of violence, like
Yeah.
caused him to have a mental break.
Yeah.
That I don't think he even like directly participated in it. Like, so that's part of the Kansas
Yeah.
Potawatomi
Yeah.
massacre.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. Like the amount of like not just John Brown Jr. At least two other folks that I can recall. One of whom I think was part of John Brown's Secret Six funding ring
Mhm.
after Harper's Ferry, who also had a mental break, and that was something to do with sort of like the psychic cost of recognize the fact that I am a traitor to my country, which is like I just got finished going through Dante with Kale, and at the very very bottom of hell in Satan's mouth are famous spiritual and political traitors. And the idea that you have so broken faith with the social fabric that you're a part of is something that will wreck your mind, or at least that's something that evidently did happen to people 150 years ago in a way that's kind of like hard. It's hard to believe now. I don't know, like it's more complicated,
Mhm.
especially since we're all conspiracy adjacent here. So we're all on the fringe anyway. So all of everyone who is listening to the stream, your sanity is suspect and you know it.
Neil, we have a couple more questions too, but Neil asked, do you think the Civil War was inevitable?
It happened, so yes.
I think there is a strong case for that. It's hard to see what the world would have been like otherwise. Right? There was a kind of building of tension, and I don't know what the release would have been.
I would like to say I believe no, but imagining your way out of that is incredibly difficult. But no. Like this is where I get very, very pacifist Christian. Like violence has been like the violence and disunity has been definitively dealt with at the cross. And so somewhere in the cross was the power to forestall and prevent the Civil War. We were unwilling to go that far, and so we had a war. So we were unable to live up to our massive religious ideals on a collective national level. So yeah, we refused to renounce our sin, and we paid for it in 600,000 dead bodies.
Yeah.
But no. Like I believe to my core, violence is not inevitable. I think if you're a Christian, you must believe that. At some deep level, you're saying, like, if you say that is inevitable, then there's no power stronger than it.
I think there's also a perspective to say that it's inevitable. At what point was it inevitable, right? At what point did it become the possibility that couldn't be avoided? Because I think there is a point where it's just like you're in war, so like it's here, and could you have done anything to prevent it? A day before, it's hard to say. But yeah, I think there's an element of like it worked out the way it did, and maybe it couldn't have gone a better way. You have who is it, Leibniz, who says we live in the best of all possible worlds, that this is the best way it could have played out, and so
yeah, I have trouble believing that one, but I know maybe it'll all make sense someday.
Who is it, Voltaire? Voltaire wrote Candide just to kind of poke fun at Leibniz for that, and I don't know. I think he misunderstood it. I think we live in the best possible world is a very pessimistic thing to say, but that's just another.
Well, I mean, I'm also a big time Providence guy as well. So I mean, like on the one hand, I want to like firmly insist violence is not inevitable. We do not need to submit to it, or like saying something like violence or war is inevitable is cope. It's cope. It's I don't need to think about it. I do not need to seek a creative way out of this. You may find yourself pragmatically there, but that's different from you're putting violence at the top of the hierarchy in a way, and you're putting it in a place that it doesn't belong.
Yeah. Well, and I think the middle level of agency is the tough part, right? Because you have the personal agency, and then you have the total sovereignty of God, and both of those are kind of easier to grasp.
Yeah.
But then you have the political agency, and how much pull do I have on this, and how much of this is led by spirits that I have no clue, and yeah, that makes all that another level. We have another question here. Loved what you said about the logos. Any more to say on that?
The
logos in the context of
that's when I talked
David
about
was living in line with the logos. I believe that's what.
Yeah. It's the idea that like David was so kind of like tapped into like the logos, the logic of creation. That like he was so that like the logos, the word made flesh, Jesus' his life just kind of like oozed out of like just kind of kept breaking through his life in a way that has not been the case for any other individual, except for maybe like like Moses or something like that.
Yeah, that was actually the
I know, like,
I want to bring up.
Yeah, this is me being kind of like very speculative and just kind of like like bullshitting and playing with terms a little bit, but I don't know. Like I'm also kind of like toyed around with the idea of that like there are different kind of like ways to tap into the logos, and I think at least for like like dudes in particular, there's a certain sort of like your profession is a way of kind of like tapping into the logic of creation, or at least like I don't know, like work, vocation. I mean, not every like shit job is necessarily going to be that, but I just feel like it's sort of really, really meaningful work when you kind of find the thing that you really feel like you were built to do. I feel like that's you in getting close to what you feel like you were made to do. That's your like I kind of intuitively believe that's sort of like the surest way for you to really tap into like the depths of creation. And it's you kind of doubling down there is I think your best bet for kind of tapping into wisdom.
Well, I think Flow State has a lot kind of connections. I think that's what Rebecca was trying to get at. I still need to make my way through that, the awakening from the meaning crisis, but I think that's part of it, is that there's this experience of high connection, and it's just not as present anywhere else. That when you're able to kind of, it feels like you're doing what you were made to do. Like and it's work at the same time. Which is
I mean, I think it's also sort of like your path to sainthood, I guess. Like that is the kind of like realm of creation you might be called to exercise particular dominion over. So that's because that's the thing. Like no two saints are alike. They are all very unique and very specific. And I think they have found kind of like the vein of creation they're supposed to tap into. So like kind of like because we're particular situated human beings, we don't have access to the universal logos. Like sort of like we're like the whole thing it's too big to express it us fully. So we need to find a path in. And because it's core, it's central, it's all gathered up into Christ, then like there's 1,000 different paths to that center.
I think one thing that because we're talking a little bit about this agency, right? The sovereignty of God and our personal like agency and being able to kind of pursue these routes. I've been trying to find how to fuse the two together, and I think John Brown somehow was able to kind of walk a line between the two of like simultaneously, like this is what I feel like I'm made to do, I'm going to follow it, and then also like God is sovereign over all of it, and so if he wants something to succeed, it will. If he doesn't,
I'm gonna say this. I feel like this isn't fodder for like public like YouTube stream, but I think in like a voice chat somewhere we should chat about compare John Brown's Calvinism with PBK's Calvinism.
If he makes a reaction video, maybe he'll do it himself, and
Yes.
we don't have to do it to a stranger.
Yeah.
Or not. A stranger.
I mean, Brown is definitely like the kind of like the epitome of the so Calvinist. He's a tremendous activist. But even before he picked up a gun, like he was like adamantly like we'd even talk about like the tremendous things he did participating in like Elba, New York, and stuff like that. I mean, we talked a little bit about how he went out of his way to be an exemplary supporter of the Underground Railroad, an exemplary like a model for how to treat these disenfranchised brothers and sisters as full human beings. Like
Yeah.
like everyone around him was like, you were pretty serious about this like equality stuff in a way that's kind of scandalous.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story about these strangers who are kind of wandering through the wilderness, and they stumble across John Brown's homestead, and they talk to his family first, and they're all kind of talking about this kind of mysterious figure of John Brown, and then he shows up with these two, like black men with him, and he brings them to, like into his home to his table, and they're all sharing food together, and he's introducing them both with respect, calling everybody like Mr. or Miss or all these kind of things, and to these like people who are wandering through the wilderness, like, where did we end up? Like, what is this world that we ended up in where like, there's like racial equality here, and like what is going on? And he very much is this kind of, again, out of place person. Like he's living in the middle of this community where no one looks like him, but he is, again, he's doing something new that's never really been done before.
I know, I love that, especially like Lost in the Woods. It just feels like a fairy tale, and they walk into not fairyland, but like it's almost like the Big Rock Candy Mountains of equality.
Yeah. Well, and then to have this person that they encounter, they write later, and they're like, this guy that we met is this guy who committed this act of terrorism in Virginia.
Oh my God!
You're like, what?
Like, that's not the John Brown I know.
Yeah, it's wild. One anecdote too I had read was so in Harpers Ferry, there was an attack by the civilians. It was led by the mayor, I believe, who ended up dying in a firefight. The mayor in his will said that if he was to die, one of his slaves, I don't know if he has multiple, but one of his slaves and his wife and his children were all to be freed. So in dying, more slaves were freed, which is this kind of weird interplay, who's the guy to also free his slaves in his will, but then also the fact that John Brown, having killed this man, or I guess the story is that his I think it's his co-leader, the one who was friends with Frederick Douglass, might have been the one to fire that shot. But again, these complex threads that are all kind of coming together of like, what's going on here in the midst of all this. Yeah.
It's just so complicated, man. We're so intertwined.
We'll leave that up for a second as we Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yep,
it's very bad.
Very bad. It's never going to go the way you think it will.
No. Yeah, I think if no one's going to hop on, we can probably start with any closing thoughts that you had.
I think I've said just about everything I think I need to say. I appreciate kind of like getting a lot of this out on the table so I can set John Brown aside for a minute to do a couple other things with my brain. But
yeah, it was an apt time to do it. I think the last thing that I wanted to bring up was just that I think in reflection, I think there's a lot of people who will kind of take up John Brown to represent whatever they want to represent. And I think in the process of doing that, they're tearing him apart. It's similar to the way that Chesterton writes about Christ, how there's people who will take one part of Christ's message and they'll tear it from the other parts. But he is both are very complex figures, and you know, all the pieces need to be considered when kind of considering the impact and the legacy. Yeah, and I think the religion piece, I think, has been very underanalyzed for John Brown. But those are my thoughts. I don't know if you had any additional comments for that.
More so like a broader thing. Like one of the reasons that I think like I took so quickly when you started sending the walls of text my way is I'm just really interested in, I get this idea of kind of like wanting to construct sort of like a theological, initially like a theological geography is sort of like a private project I'm doing to kind of like make sense of where I live. And I'm trying to figure out kind of like just asking the question, like, what are the stories that are latent in like the particular land that I call my home out here in Washington. And so that's sort of like a creative project I'm kind of like slowly involved in. But part of that is because I think like identity or like the things that make you who you are really, really important, and place and history are two kind of like major components to that. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm sort of, you know, like one of the many pieces of my kind of like creative life is really kind of like wanting to like forthrightly tackle the question, like, what does it mean to be an American? I have like a piece of the Lincoln Lyceum message that I'm not going to get to because it's long, but like he talks a lot about as he's like starting his like national political career. He's got this deep sense of the fact that we have received something truly great through no work of our own by being born in America as Americans, and taking very seriously the fact that there's this thing that has been given to me, that has been bled for, it's been died for, it's built up. It has done a lot of good for me before I had a chance to do anything in return. And he expresses this deep sense of gratitude that should flow into a certain sort of like duty to continue to build it up into something better and more interesting. And so I think John Brown has become a tremendous sort of like really kind of like diamond historical compression. Like all of America seems to like have like spread out and be drawn back into like this one like really kind of like punctiliar moment, which then explodes into the Civil War. But it's a moment of particular like I think John Brown is kind of like uniquely fascinating, and he's deeply worthy of attention. And I'm excited to kind of keep trolling around and find other moments like him, that because I really feel like kind of like grappling with John Brown's story is a solid way to grapple with big pieces of the American spirit that is working its way through all of us.
Definitely. We didn't even talk about what's the buzzword that's been going around? The therapeutic deism. Yeah. I mean, I like again, like I said, I think you can do a whole stream on John Brown's relationship to the Transcendentalists. So we'll have to tag Sam and see what he's got to say. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he's an incredible counterpoint. Like he's definitely not any of those things. Yes. Maybe moralistic, I guess, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it's the era. Yeah. Okay, I think I might be out of things to say. So.
Yeah, we did it, man.
We did it.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you all for joining.
All right.
Have a good one, everybody. Have a good night. Be safe and don't do violence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye. Yeah.